All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jocelyne Daw, and I am joined by my colleague, David Lee, who is one of the practitioner trainers based in Vancouver. And we want to welcome people from right across Canada to this webinar on building effective partnerships, the art of partnering. And I also particularly want to welcome some former colleagues, as well as friends, as well as people who've actually taken the Partnership Brokers training course from both Canada, the United States, and we even have a couple of Australians who have joined the call. So a very warm Canadian welcome to everyone, and we're delighted to have so many people able to join us today. So today, next slide, thank you. We are going to present this webinar that comes as a result of some significant work done by an organization called the Partnership Brokers Association, which is a global nonprofit organization that's based in the United Kingdom. And I just was going to say, before we get started, I wondered if I could make sure people turn off their video, because we are going to be recording this, and we don't want to have people who might not want to be in the recording part of that. So thanks so much for that. So the Partnership Brokers Association is, as I say, it's a nonprofit organization that was set up initially in 2002 and went as a standalone organization just over almost 7 years ago now in 2012. And the organization was set up with the idea of really helping organizations from all three sectors around the world look at how they could partner more effectively, with the goal of really understanding that today partnership is so important for us to be able to address some of the big challenges we have and to really work towards creating an inclusive, sustainable, and just society. So the organization also promotes professionalism and integrity in brokering partnerships and provides training, research, and supporting services. And when the organization got set up, our founder, a woman named Roz Tennyson, had been involved in many partnerships around the globe in the 1990s and early 2000s, and was really surprised to see how some partnerships worked really, really well, and others that she expected to be successful just did not. So she and another colleague spent some time really trying to look at what were the factors that helped the partnership work. So what made partnerships work? What were the challenges? What were the things that needed to take place? So it's very much the material that's being developed through the Partnership Brokers is very much from a practitioner point of view, from a practical people actually doing partnership work. And then over time, we've added in a number of frameworks and structures to try to help underpin and deepen understanding of the actual practice of partnership. So if I can have the next slide, David. So today what we're going to do is talk a little bit about why partnering has really become something that's much more talked about, lots of people understanding the value of a partnership. And then we want to go a little deeper and talk about what we mean actually by that word partnership. So often partnership has become a sort of business as usual term to describe funding relationships or everyday relationships that really smooth over the very difficult work and hard work of partnering effectively. And we'll look at the definition as well as key attributes. And then we're going to dive into the really how. How do you partner effectively? What are some of the frameworks, the principles, the skills, the practices that you can take and use in terms of building your own effective partnering? And then we're going to end up with talking about who manages the partnering process and what your role is. Because one of the things our founder discovered when she was doing her research was that the most effective partnerships had somebody who spent time really, or a group of people who spent time really managing not just the project, but actually the partnership and the important role that people have in making partnerships work. So in terms of looking at why partnering has become more and more of a consideration. Certainly lots of funders looking at trying to encourage people to get together. It's because largely the world is changing so rapidly. It's much more complex, there's greater speed, you're seeing scarcity, but at the same time, you've got this real interest in innovation, in creatively looking at how we address some of these social challenges, and a real desire to participate beyond the sort of traditional volunteer roles and traditional nonprofit support. And when we look also at our challenges today that are so much bigger, and also a real recognition that these challenges are both shared and also ones that could never be addressed with a single organization or a single sector. No organization has the kind of scale, resources, all the materials that they need to really address some of these mental health issues, climate change, affordable housing, poverty at scale. So coming together to partner is considered now to be really one of the critical ways to address these big issues. And finally, resources. The fact is, philanthropy has not grown in 100 years. There isn't a government in Canada or around the world that has leftover resources to address these things. So we have the resources we have. So what we need to do is look at how we use those resources. How do we use those resources differently so that we can get bigger impact, we can get bigger scale, with recognizing that we only have the resources that we have. And of course, there's this growing expectation, as we talked about earlier, that our shared challenges really require partnership. And I think this really became much more prominent when the United Nations launched the UN Sustainable Development Goals in late 2015, about 3 years ago, where they looked at some of the big global challenges and codified them into 16 key strategies or goals, and then added a 17th, which related specifically to the need for partnerships to achieve these goals. A group of organizations, including the partnership brokers, have worked with the UN to create a wonderful website called Promoting Effective Partnering, which is a series of tools and resources for those working in creating partnerships. So when you look at partnerships as well, there's the push factors and there's also the pull factors. And the fact is, when partnerships are done well, they definitely can have bigger impact, create greater value. Partnering isn't always the answer, and we'll talk a bit about that later. Sometimes it makes more sense to just go on your own to address issues, but partnering really is important for those bigger issues. The other thing about partnering is that they can have so much more value add that goes much beyond the traditional just achieving the project goals. It's also an opportunity to change the way organizations think, how they act, how they behave, the kind of relationships that they build. There's more opportunity for innovation, more integrated solutions, more scale, power shift in terms of when organizations work together in a true partnership, power is shared, so power is shifted, looking at wider influence on policy change, systems change, and then the kind of learning that successful, effective partnerships can bring. So what we want to look at now is sort of how partnerships take place. And partnerships are hard work, and they often fall short of expectations. People have lots of good intentions, and then they get into the partnering process and realize how complicated and difficult it can be. So what we want to talk about is the fact that the partnership process needs to have as much attention as the partnership project itself. And the whole idea of working together in partnership is very emergent. So it is constantly evolving and changing based on people's experiences, practices, and it is definitely open to challenge in terms of how to partner effectively. The second is it really requires intentionality. Everything about a partnership needs to be done from a purposeful perspective, really thinking about what is needed, what are the skills, what are the frameworks that we can use to really help maximize partnerships. But intentionality is critical. And then finally, recognizing that it's people that make partnerships work. So that means that you've got to build capacity of people and build a culture and mindset of partnering, which is very different than just the sort of pushing forward on a project, as important as achieving those project results are. So we believe every sector needs to better understand when and how to partner. So we want to start with a definition. This is the Oxford English Dictionary definition, which is an ongoing working relationship where risks and rewards are shared. So often things that are called partnerships are really sharing rewards but not sharing risks. So my question to challenge your thinking right now is, does your organization have their own definition of partnership? And if you do, how does it align with this one? And when you actually do work in partnership, do you spend time at the beginning discussing what you all mean by that word partnership? And of course, that partnership definition is quite straightforward. And there's a lot more layers involved in terms of understanding what partnership really means. So we've come up with a number of things that include agreement to a shared vision and a common purpose. Sometimes it isn't even a common goal. It's a shared vision of trying to address something in a bigger way. And I always say that often the shared vision and common purpose is easy to buy into. It's often motherhood and apple pie. But a really successful, genuine partnership takes into account and provide allowances for individual partner interests and their own personal goals. And we'll talk a bit about why that is important. But everybody who comes to the partnership will come with a shared commitment, but will also have their own individual interests. And one of the key things is really driving to get below the surface and understanding why partners are at the table and if their interests really align with the success of a partnership. The third is really co-creating, co-designing, co-making decisions, finding solutions together. So this isn't about someone creating a project and then going out and saying, do you want to partner with us? Unless you spend the time saying we're going to partner, but we'll really spend some time looking at what that looks like and how we make that work. And then partners really share decision-making and leadership responsibilities. They commit to both mutual accountability as well as horizontal accountability in terms of their own organizations, the clients that they're working in partnership to try to serve, the issues they're trying to address. And finally, partners take a principled, values-based approach to partnering. So understanding what partnerships are is one thing, but also looking at the fact that there are no just one-size-fits-all partnerships. There's different types of partnerships, and they relate directly to the level of change that people are working in partnership are seeking. So you're looking at, on the far left-hand side there of the slide, what we would call more traditional partnerships, where you're really looking at organizations coming together to deliver a service or a program together, often within the status quo, where the impact is really usually on an individual who is benefiting from that particular program. And as you move along the scale to look at more systemic challenges, you get those partnerships where they're really looking to address a cause or a social or an environmental issue, looking at it from the point of view of the whole system. And this is where you get into a lot more complicated and complex relationships where you've got different types of partners that are going to be needed to really look at within the whole system and mapping the system and understanding who are the right partners to bring into a relationship. And the final one are these transformational partnerships where you're really looking not just at the system, but how do you change the system? How do you change policies and practices? And I always say that these partnerships are not good, better, best. It's finding the one that's fit for purpose. And many very successful partnerships start at that, coming together to look for efficiencies by delivering programs and services together that then allow for those relationships to deepen in terms of trust, understanding, respect, where then you can start looking at creating deeper relationships around an issue within a system and eventually leading to system change. I have personally never seen a partnership that starts at the transformational level. And each one adds value. And certainly one of the big challenges that we talk about in the partnership brokers is how do you actually push organizations to create more ambitious partnerships, to move out of that comfort level of those kind of more traditional grassroots co-created projects or services to really move up to those issue-based systems approach to systems change. So thinking about it or thinking about how you can advance your partnerships to be more ambitious. So when we start looking at going beyond the definition and the types of partnership, the fact is every single partnership and partnership project is unique. And everyone's perception of what the partnership is going to do and how it's going to work is very different. So one of the things that we've found is that while there's many common features, there's no single sort of one size fits all. There's no sort of roadmap where it's step one, step two. Every partnership is highly contextualized. And as you're building the partnership, often you sometimes have to get started. You have a good enough partnership. There's enough alignment. You will never get consensus. Have you got enough alignment to get going? And at the end of the day, can you answer the question that by coming together, you're going to create more value, greater influence, and bring about tangible change? And because there's no roadmap, one of the things that we talk a lot about is thinking about the challenges and how you address those challenges by taking a very values-based approach to partnering. So when you're looking at the kind of culture and mindset that you want to create within your partnership that will allow your partnership the best chance of success, one of the biggest challenges that partners face when they come together is anxiety about differences. The for-profit world, working with the nonprofit sector, with government, everyone comes with a different approach, different way of addressing or thinking about specific issues, which often creates a lot of confusion. It creates anxiety about how are we going to work together. So one of the core values that we talk about is the idea of embracing or valuing the importance of diversity. Diversity is really critical in terms of a strength of making a partnership more innovative and adding new value. The second principle is the challenge is power imbalance. And I have never once seen a partnership where every single partner is the same size, is bringing the exact same skills, the exact same resources to the table. And yet every single person who's a partner at the table is bringing some value or they shouldn't be there. And so what's critical is ensuring that the partnership has equity. And equity is different than equal. Equity is about everyone having a voice, everyone being heard, everyone being listened to. That doesn't mean that their thoughts or opinions will be included or followed, but everyone will feel that their voice was heard, and whatever the decision is, that it was fair and there was inclusiveness in terms of thinking about it. The third important value is really looking at the whole idea of building openness, having no hidden agendas. And this goes back, and I talked about at the beginning of everyone having their common goals. but helping to really build openness by understanding what each partner needs at the table to be successful. What are some of the issues that they're dealing with within their organization? That doesn't mean you have to share everything, but you need to be open about the challenges, about your needs, because that really builds trust and it creates that more horizontal accountability. So openness is a critical value in building partnership success. The fourth principle that we really encourage as foundational principles is developing understanding that every organization is going to have their own interests that will sometimes compete with each other. But then unless you understand what those interests are and accept and make sure that those interests align with what you're trying to achieve, you will not build mutual benefit. And often when I have people saying, I'm not having partners aren't showing up at the table, my first question to them is, what are they getting out of it? What do they need to get out of it to be able to be there? So everybody needs to be getting some kind of benefit that goes often beyond just the common goal, because that leads to engagement and a more sustainable model. And it's important to be open and honest about that right up front. And our final value is the fact that the only thing that every partnership has when they start together is the fact that there is uncertainty. No one knows whether the partnership is going to work, whether you've got the right theory of change, whether you've thought of everything, which inevitably you won't. And that's why having these other principles are so important, because you can have an open, honest relationship. But in terms of uncertainty, the most important principle here is having courage, being courageous to lead and do things differently, because we have to have the courage to try things if we're going to really address the big issues that we all face together. So just as a summary, and we will be providing all of these slides to everyone who's on the call, is the embracing diversity is really what leads to the innovation. Having equity is what builds respectful relationships. Building openness is critical to having the trust, and every partnership only moves at the speed of trust. Having commitment to everyone's receiving mutual benefit is really what delivers engagement and long-term commitment and sustainability. And courage to try this kind of work is really what brings the kind of breakthrough results we all really need. So before we move forward, I just wanted to invite people to ask any questions. You can send it through chat. You can also put up your hand if you would like to ask a question. So David is monitoring those. So if you have any questions, we would be very pleased to have you bring those forward.
We'll just give a moment for folks, and please feel free to ask your questions during the remainder of the webinar, as well as we'll allow some time at the end to answer any questions that come up.
So just while we're waiting for that, David, I'm going to just add one last thing in terms of, people thinking about the value-based approach and the values that we see as foundational for any partnership. I do want to add that while those are critical, it's probably really important to have a discussion about those with your partners and see if there are other values that you feel would be important to the specific work that you're doing. These are by no means an exhaustive list. They're just a foundational list.
Agree. I think that goes back to your earlier point about, is there time at the front of defining partnership collectively and what that means for everyone involved. Now, I just saw Amy raise her hand. Amy, if you'd like to unmute yourself, then we can hear your question.
Hi there, thanks for that. And hi from the Southern Hemisphere. I'm half a coffee down, so bear with me if I'm still not making sense. My question was, my interest, I should say, I work for Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and our focus is on coordinating the Sustainable Development Goals. sort of coordinating implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. I know you did some work on that partnership platform, and would be interested if you've done similar work with the SDGs, sort of working on the SDGs as your end goal with partners in Canada as a group, sort of at a lower level than that international level.
Well, maybe I can address that. I'm doing some work right now with the United Way of Calgary, and as you might be aware, the United Nations has, I think, a half a dozen global partnerships with other nonprofit organizations that are focused on similar challenges. And the United Way is one of those organizations that has signed on as kind of a lead partner on addressing the Sustainable Development Goals. So yes, those are all things, not every goal are ones that are being embraced at every local level. Here in Calgary, there's a lot of emphasis on poverty and the poverty goal in those United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. There's other organizations that are also more at a local level than, say, foreign affairs or international, that are also addressing. We've got a group here in Alberta that's rallied around the Sustainable Development Goals, including using the power of partnership to address them. And, they've been looking at a number of ways in which they can work with corporations to help them integrate Sustainable Development Goals in their corporate social responsibility, their community investment. So it's being done not so much that I know of here in Canada at an international level. I don't think our Department of Foreign Affairs has done that. And then I see a good friend, Heather Oxman, who's mentioning from Calgary, or just outside of Calgary, that the Canadian Federation of University Women in Canada are working on that as it relates to education, poverty, childcare. So again, doing that in a way that's, and there's other organizations, obviously, in Toronto and other parts of Canada. We have a big country, so it is definitely happening.
Jocelyne, is that, can I just ask a follow-up question? Is that looking at sort of the how of SDG 17, the how partnerships can be used across the goals as well as the goals themselves? I'm thinking...
Yeah, definitely. And that's the work that I'm doing with the United Way here in Calgary, is really taking this approach to shift more of their funding away from single organizations and single programs to how do we work and support organizations coming together around issue-based approaches.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What we've also seen is the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, are often a great overall frame to bring people together in partnerships. Just last week, there was a report issued by the Victoria Foundation in BC, Canada, and they pointed to a set of the SDGs that were a real focus and for the nonprofit community, civil society in the Victoria Capital Region, as a way to demonstrate the real progress and the contribution made by civil society working across sectors. So I think the SDGs are increasingly becoming that common reference point to draw people together at the front end.
Good.
All right, well, why don't we move on to the second half of the webinar. Thank you, Jocelyne. And as mentioned before, if you've got questions as we go through this second half, please feel free to type them in the chat box as we go, or we'll definitely leave some time at the end to answer your questions. Because cross-sector partnerships tackle challenges at a system level, working across sectors to tackle these bigger challenges that Jocelyne referenced, there is a need to look at this from both an art and science perspective. The art of it being anywhere from the imagination required to create and articulate what the vision is, the common vision for people coming together, to develop and activate the people skills and engage people both on an organizational level, but on a personal level as well, to also looking at the science of it, taking the rigorous approach, which is data informed, which ensures that things like documentation of key conversations and meetings are happening, and that there's a degree of professional detachment that is brought to the partnership. There's a fine balance. So engagement, which is on an emotional level, as well as a detachment, which says, let's look at all different perspectives and let's look at them in a way we've co-designed, criteria-wise, the process of evaluation. So that's what we want to look at, is both the art and the science in cross-sector partnerships. With the art, there's obviously a wide range of attributes and skills that come with that. At the top there, you see empathy. So this is the ability to understand the perspective of others, really helping partners relish the diversity. And that being one of the key principles, we really like to emphasize that in the work of the Partnership Brokers Association and through the training offered by the PBA, using empathy as one of those core foundational skills that can be developed within ourselves as individuals, as well as across the collective organizations and people working together. At times it can be much more, I'll call it a hard-edged situation where you're getting into the negotiation of the details. So specifying the specific shared interests, as well as what Jocelyne had mentioned before, some of the differing interests that are good to acknowledge at the front end of a partnership being developed. And I won't go through each and every one, but as you can see, there's a wide array of attributes and skills. The final one that you see is letting go. And that's one that's from the perspective of, as an individual, understanding that there is no particular solution that will come at the front end of a true partnership being developed. Co-creation is what develops the solution. And what that requires is a letting go of initial assumptions of what the answer is. And if you are in a brokering and support role of a partnership, also considering the letting go of your work in that partnership and thinking about where the partnership will go with you moving on. In other words, consideration of developing the capacity within the organizations and people. On the science side of things, it's about taking a phased, thorough, and rigorous approach. And while in the framework that you see on this slide, it may give a sense of a nice, clean, step-by-step approach, within each of these steps, there is a lot of nuance and there is art. So in those early conversations, before you agree to partner and going through the steps of defining the scope of the work that you'll do together, there can be a lot of challenging conversations which get into the art of listening. As mentioned before, it's not only paying attention to the work to go through these steps and these phases and delivering a project. As you can see on the bottom left-hand side, the review and revise. It's also about looking at the relationship and where things are at on a relationship basis, not strictly measuring results. And then moving on, it's assessing what opportunities there are to move from a traditional or adaptive partnership to transformational opportunities by sharing knowledge and experience that have been gained through a particular set of work that's been done together. We're presenting here a formula that can help determine whether to partner. Now, this is not meant to be taken literally as an algebraic formula that answers the question. It simply is a way to represent in an algebraic formula the key principles that we talked about earlier. So The overall added value of a partnership needs to look at the outcomes of the partnership, and these can be project specific. In addition to that is looking at the wider benefits, which includes what is the increased quality of what's being, what comes because of the partnership, and the ancillary benefits that include the relationships that will have been developed through the organizations across sectors coming together in a way they hadn't before. This is what can lead from an initial traditional partnership to something that moves more into the adaptive and transformational partnership space. Now, those outcomes and benefits need to outweigh the resources required to build and maintain the partnership, the resources and the transaction costs. As we mentioned before, partnerships are hard work, so none of this comes for free. There are costs that people need to invest in order to take the time to develop that trust, to move towards that openness across new individuals, new partners coming together. And then what you see at the end of that formula is what was the option to be able to achieve the same outcome. So in some cases, unless the value of the partnership minus the hard work and the cost of the partnership outweighs what the next best option is, you should not proceed with the partnership. So it's to take all of those things into account, and when you see the benefits outweigh the investments of what you need to put in and the comparison to what else you could have done, then you can move forward in the partnership. To identify who we choose to partner with, a reference point we've got is from a collective impact framework. And here you can look both historically to those that you have worked with in the past on previous projects, those that you would aspire to work with, and those that you may not have been open to working with before, but can begin to see the value of partnering with because of the resources, the relationships that they can bring to the table to tackle one of the larger goals that you may have in mind. And to do this assessment, we also can apply an interest-based approach to this. This is something that comes from Getting to Yes from Uri and Fisher, who wrote the book. Where we take this a step further is not only looking at the shared interests, which will be specific to how partners typically come together, as Jocelyne mentioned earlier, is also looking at the conflicting interests and understanding where other partners might be coming from that don't align with the mission and values that we come with. And so there's a degree of creating the time and space to allow those conflicting interests to emerge with as relationship develops and as trust builds in a partnership. Partnerships require a new type of leader, and the role title that we would propose is partnership brokers. This means moving from a traditional leadership mindset where there may be a single person who has a title that has a certain level to it, to moving towards a new collective leadership mindset with people coming from various organizations, from various sectors and various backgrounds that they bring to the table and together develop a horizontal accountability, which needs to look different than the traditional hierarchical definitions of power and leadership. So the role of partnership brokers are really to support the new relationships that are being built, which means being an active go-between between partnering organizations and the individuals to support how the relationship gets developed, how the understanding between individuals coming together as partners is developed. We've seen many different role titles that people playing this partnership brokering role will have, anywhere from process manager, change maker, animator. Sometimes they come in disguise under role titles such as project manager or change facilitator, project coordinator. So there are many different titles that might be assigned to people who are playing the partnership brokering role. And one of the things that the PBA really encourages us to look at is not only thinking of partnership brokers as specific individuals and people with that kind of title. It's also about the process of partnership brokering, which goes back to that idea of there's a shared accountability and a collective approach to this work. And throughout the process or the partnership cycle, there are many different roles and tasks that will be performed by people doing partnership brokering. What that means is there are many different roles as a partnership broker that you can play based on different types of strengths. And here you can see the array of different roles that can be played. So it's a moment for you to reflect on the work that you do and thinking about what your strengths are and the type of contribution you make as a person supporting the development of a partnership. It can be anywhere from on the left-hand side, where it's more about the thinking, the innovation, thinking about what the possible vision for the future might look like. It can also be much more action-oriented. So making sure that all the I's are being dotted and the T's crossed so that there is a firm, rigorous, step-by-step record of how the partnership is progressing with the decisions that you're making, the conversations that you're having, and the key points that are being raised. And one of my favorite activities from the training course that PBA offers is a self-assessment, where many of you have likely done things like this before, whether it's Myers-Briggs or others. This is another, the Belbin assessment tool is another way of really thinking about what kind of roles do you have a strong preference and strength towards. Another way to ask the question is, what hat or hats do you wear? And this can differ throughout the partnering cycle. In the early days, it could be much more about facilitation of those conversations, really defining what the shared interests, as well as drawing out what those different interests are. It can be negotiating what the partnership agreement is before you begin the work in earnest. And further along in the cycle, it can be about evaluating, reviewing and revising where the partnership is at. And depending on whether you're affiliated with a specific organization in the partnership or you're an external facilitator who's brought in, that will also change the nature of what hats you wear. So as a coach, oftentimes that's something that can come about as an external person supporting partnerships and having the ability to coach across different individuals in different organizations. And as an external person, also having that opportunity to facilitate understanding across people coming from different sectors. I will reinforce the point, and Jocelyne, I'm going to take one of the phrases that I know you often say is getting the inside onside first, which points to a key role even as an internal partnership broker, an internal facilitator of partnerships. There's a lot of work to be done within an individual organization. It's not to assume that everyone within my own organization is on side to start. And it's not to assume that everyone from a particular sector thinks and feels the same way about the issue and the approach to take. So throughout the partnering cycle, from scoping and building through to sustaining outcomes, there's certainly a lot of work to be done to support the partnering cycle. And what we've got here is an initial view on all those different types of tasks that a partnership broker can and will take on. You can see from scoping and building, it's both the negotiation, but before the negotiation, it's that exploration work and drawing people together in a way that allows them to, invites them to share what their previous experience and notions coming in will be. Drawing them together in a way that really gets them excited on a co-created vision and a co-created process. All the way through to reviewing and revising and playing that role not only of measuring outcomes, also measuring what the relationship and level of collaboration has been through the work together. And then on the sustaining outcomes is once again that exploring of what the options are moving forward. Here's a really important one that I know I need to spend more time on, is helping partners celebrate from the work that they've done. It's so easy to get caught up in the magnitude of the challenges we work on and forego the opportunities to step back for a moment and really recognize milestones achieved, learnings that have been had, as well as relationships built. Critical success factors for partnership brokers is both on the bottom, what you see is results and productivity, and the efficiencies and effectiveness, so an outcome perspective, as well as from an arts perspective or a softer perspective, the key approach and the 5 principles and values that Jocelyne covered, as well as what are attitudes and competencies around being a good partner and supporting partnership with others, what that looks like. So we'll now open it up again for any questions that folks have.
David, I was just going to read out something that one of the participants typed in terms of looking at throughout the partnering experience, the importance of checking, rechecking inside that partnering is still an important part of what's needed, what's required, what the organization is prepared to support. So I think that's a really important thing. It isn't just checking in at the beginning, it's checking in throughout.
Yes, thank you, Heather. That is a really important insight, and in some ways easy to take for granted, because you know, once we've started the work, we've signed an agreement, everyone's on board. That importance of continuing to check in.
And I was going to say, David, as well, just with the partnering cycle, you know, we presented as you did, and that it's a nice sort of circle and it goes from step to step to step. And I think partnerships are a lot more chaotic than that. Sometimes you get started and you realize almost immediately you need to review what your assumptions were and actually step back and perhaps rework the project frame, or you need to rework who's involved as a partner. So it's a very fluid and dynamic cycle, the partnership cycle, and it's by no means straightforward approach to working with other organizations and other sectors.
Yes. Linda, I see you've raised your hand. If you want to unmute yourself, welcome your comments and questions.
Hi, just had a couple of comments. I really appreciated your overview of the partnership brokering. And the 2 points that come to mind, I really appreciated you talked about the balance between art and science, and how important that is in terms of, you know, when do you do an intuitive reaction or deductive action? We we really have to be able to know as brokers when to step back and allow things to evolve on their own, and or when to step up and say, hey, that we really need to challenge that. Is that the right way to go? Is this really meeting the goals of all of us or for some of us? The other piece I enjoyed or I appreciated was when you were talking about the Belbin assessment. Because you're right, not only does it confirm some of our strengths and what we're good and we need to work on, but it also identifies areas that maybe that we're not as good and that we need to maybe to spend a little bit of time or training on, how can I become a better negotiator? I'm good at facilitating presentations, but I'm a little bit sticky. So it's a real nice assessment to sort of self-assessment, to sort of congratulate yourself or to say, I need to spend some time on it. But anyway, I just wanted to say hello, and I appreciated the overview.
Thank you, Linda. Yeah, I think you're spot on, and it's one thing that's really a great reminder for myself is thinking about where it's really critical and valuable to have others to work alongside. So the idea of co-facilitating, co-brokering, and that collective leadership mindset is something that really rings true. You know, we can't, as much as we'd like to believe, we can't be good at all things.
Yeah, and then that's a great way of building a team around you, and deciding, is there somebody else that we need? What other skills do we need? So it's not only in terms of the people, but it's the skills to make this partnership successful.
Yes.
I see David, Amy has a question.
Amy.
You can just unmute yourself.
Oh, was that me?
Or perhaps that was from earlier. We see your hand up, so.
I think it was from earlier. It may have just been a sort of subconscious putting up of hand again because I was enjoying it. Sorry, I didn't actually have a question.
Okay, that's great.
No problem.
Well, just while if there's other questions, I just wanted to let people know that we will make this presentation available. We'll be sending it out to all the people who've taken the webinar today so that you can spend some time reviewing a little bit more. And David just put up our final slide, which gives you a little bit more information if you're interested in going deeper and really having a real hands-on experience about how do you step-by-step put together an effective, successful partnership. We really tried to make you think differently. We're going to be offering it in Vancouver. We're doing that in partnership in February 25th to 28th. Hard to find a better spot in Canada than Vancouver in February. We're doing that in partnership with Vantage Point. It's going to be offered in Toronto in mid-April in partnership with the Atmospheric Fund, and then in Edmonton in June in partnership with the Edmonton Chamber of Voluntary Organizations. So we work very closely with local community organizations to ensure that we get the kind of reach and impact, and we work with organizations who have access to all three sectors. And I'm very pleased to say that when we've taught this course, we always have government, we've had universities, nonprofits, of course, corporate people, private foundations take the course. And it's a wonderful way to bring all sectors together to really help think differently in the development of partnerships. And I see just one question was, are there case studies during the 4 days? So part of what we do is we actually have a case study that we use throughout the 4 days to walk through the partnership cycle. And we do all sorts of different activities, including role play, to give people a real experience of doing partnering. And then both David and I and all the other trainers share our own personal experiences in partnering, as do the participants. And this is not a beginner course. It is meant for those who've had experience in partnership, who are coming with their own experiences. And so often, so much of the learning for all of us, including the trainers is from the participants. And as I mentioned, we've got trainers around the world from many countries. We've got about 75 associates that are involved, and on an annual basis we get together and we talk about what have we learned from teaching the course, what have we heard and learned from participants. And I think of when I first took the course compared to what it is today, it's really deepened and improved based on the feedback we've received from those partnership practitioners who are in the field on a day-to-day basis, bringing partnerships to life.
I would add to that, Jocelyne, that in addition to the case studies and learning from others, one of the big takeaways for me has been that reinforcement of reflection through the course. And it really allows folks to take that time, which we often don't provide to ourselves, to reflect on the work that we've done to date, as well as what we can see that would be a big difference in going forward.
Good. Well, we are coming up to 2 o'clock the end of our first hour of this webinar. And I want to say on behalf of David and I, thank you so much to everyone. We will get this material out to you within the next day. And please don't hesitate to connect if you've got further questions, and we look forward to staying in touch.